Sarah thought she had the perfect marriage until she accidentally discovered her husband's live stream notification. What she saw next destroyed everything she believed about her life: a pregnant wife, a tech billionaire husband, and an Instagram influencer mistress. But this isn't just another cheating scandal. This is the story of how a man systematically destroyed his wife's entire existence, using her own friends and lawyer against her, until she had nothing left but a motel room and a broken heart. But when you have nothing left to lose, you become the most dangerous person alive. Before we dive into Sarah's incredible journey from victim to victor, hit that like button if you're ready for a story that will keep you on the edge of your seat. And don't forget to subscribe for more jaw-dropping true stories. Sarah Mitchell sat in the marble bathroom of their Malibu mansion, watching her husband David shower through the frosted glass door. 7 months pregnant. She felt heavy and tired, but something nagged at her. David had been distant lately, working late every night, coming home smelling like expensive perfume that definitely wasn't hers. His iPad buzzed on the counter. A notification popped up. Sarah glanced at it casually, then froze. Amber Official is going live now. Don't miss tonight's exclusive show. Sarah's blood turned cold. She knew that name. Amber Hayes, the Instagram influencer with 2 million followers who posted barely their bikini photos and lived a lifestyle that screamed sugar daddy money. With trembling fingers, Sarah opened the notification. The live stream loaded, showing Amber in a luxury hotel room, wearing nothing but a silk robe. "Hey, gorgeous people," Amber purred to her audience. "Look what Daddy bought me today." She held up a diamond necklace that Sarah recognized immediately. She had seen David purchase it last week, claiming it was for a business associate. Amber's voice continued, dripping with satisfaction. "My CEO sugar daddy is so generous. $25,000 for this little beauty. He's taking such good care of me while his poor pregnant wife sits at home." The comments exploded. Viewers were asking for details, throwing money at the screen, begging for more information about the mysterious CEO. Sarah's hands shook so violently, she nearly dropped the iPad. The shower was still running. David was humming, completely oblivious to the fact that his pregnant wife had just discovered his affair in the most humiliating way possible. "And the best part," Amber continued, "is how stupid she is. She has no idea. While she's home getting fat and boring, I'm getting diamonds and designer bags and trips to Paris." Sarah felt bile rise in her throat. She stumbled to the toilet, retching, but nothing came up except the bitter taste of betrayal. When David emerged from the shower, towel wrapped around his waist, Sarah was sitting on their bed, the iPad still in her hands. Amber's stream paused on the screen. "Hey, babe," David said casually, not looking at her as he moved to the walk-in closet. "How was your day?" Sarah held up the iPad. "Who is Amber Hayes?" David's entire body went rigid. He turned slowly, and Sarah saw something she had never seen before in his eyes. Not guilt, not shame, but cold calculation. "What are you talking about?" he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I saw the live stream, the necklace. She mentioned her CEO sugar daddy with the pregnant wife." David stared at her for a long moment. Then, to Sarah's shock, he smiled. "So you know." He shrugged, as if they were discussing the weather. "Good. I'm tired of sneaking around." "That's it." Sarah's voice cracked. "That's all you have to say? I'm carrying your child." "David, we've been married for 3 years." David pulled on a pair of jeans, his movements unhurried. "Yeah, and it's been the most boring 3 years of my life. Amber makes me feel alive again. I can't believe this. I can't believe you're standing there talking about your mistress like she's some kind of upgrade." "She is." David's voice was ice cold. She's young. She's exciting. She actually cares about my success instead of nagging me about spending time at home. Sarah stood up, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward. Get out. Get out of this house, right now. David laughed. My house, Sarah, my money, my company, my everything. You want to know the truth. You have nothing without me. No job, no income, no friends because you drove them all away with your neediness. The words hit her like physical blows. Sarah realized with growing horror that he was right. She had given up her marketing career when they got married. All their assets were in David's name. Even her car was registered to his company. You can't just throw me out. I'm pregnant. I'm not throwing you out, David said, pulling on a shirt. I'm just making the situation clear. Try to leave me. Try to take half my money, and I'll make sure you get nothing. I have lawyers, Sarah, good ones. They'll tie you up in court for years while you live in poverty. He grabbed his keys and wallet. I'm going out. Don't wait up. Where are you going? David paused at the bedroom door. To see someone who actually appreciates me. After he left, Sarah sat alone in their massive bedroom, the silence pressing down on her like a weight. She thought about calling someone, but her parents were dead. Her sister lived across the country, and they barely spoke. Her former friends from work had stopped inviting her to things after she got married and became absorbed in David's world. She was completely, utterly alone. Outside, she could hear the ocean waves crashing against the cliffs below their house. Once, that sound had been comforting. Now it sounded like the walls of her prison. 3 weeks after discovering David's affair, Sarah had convinced herself she could fix this. She read articles about marriage counseling, about working through infidelity, about the stress of impending parenthood causing men to act out. She was wrong. David hadn't even bothered to hide his relationship with Amber anymore. He would take calls from her during dinner, smiling at whatever she said while Sarah sat across from him, her growing belly a constant reminder of how trapped she was. But Sarah had a plan. She would gather evidence, find a good lawyer, and fight for what was rightfully hers. She wasn't going to be the helpless wife who rolled over and accepted betrayal. That's when Jake Morrison called. Sarah. This is Jake Morrison. We went to college together. I heard about your situation, and I want to help. Sarah remembered Jake vaguely. He had been in her marketing program, attractive in a clean-cut way, always friendly, but never someone she had been close to. I'm a divorce lawyer now, Jake continued, and I specialize in cases like yours. High net worth, complex assets, unfaithful husbands who think they can get away with anything. I don't know if I can afford us pro bono, Jake interrupted. What David's doing to you is disgusting. Let me help you get what you deserve. Hope bloomed in Sarah's chest for the first time in weeks. Maybe she wasn't as powerless as David wanted her to believe. They met at Jake's downtown office the next day. He was even more handsome than she remembered, his dark hair perfectly styled, his suit expensive but not flashy. The kind of man who inspired confidence. The first thing we need to do is document everything, Jake said, sliding a legal pad across his mahogany desk. I need you to write down every instance of adultery you've witnessed, every financial irregularity, every threat he's made. Sarah spent 2 hours writing, pouring out every humiliating detail. Jake listened with professional sympathy, occasionally asking clarifying questions. This is good, he said when she finished. Really good. California is a community property state, which means you're entitled to half of everything accumulated during the marriage. That includes his company stock. But he said he has good lawyers. He does, I know them, but they're not expecting us to move this fast. Jake leaned forward. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to file for emergency custody and spousal support before he knows what hit him. With your pregnancy and his documented infidelity, the judge will be sympathetic." For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt something other than despair. She felt hope. Jake walked her to the elevator. "Sarah, you're doing the right thing. David thinks he holds all the cards, but he's about to learn otherwise." Sarah went home that day feeling lighter than she had since discovering the affair. She actually hummed while making dinner, imagining David's face when he was served with papers. But when David came home that night, instead of his usual indifference, he was furious. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" He slammed the front door so hard the windows rattled. "I don't know what you mean. Don't play dumb with me, Sarah. I know about the lawyer." Sarah's blood went cold. "How do you? I know everything that happens in this town. Did you really think you could move against me without me finding out?" David grabbed her shoulders, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call your little friend Jake and tell him you've changed your mind. You're going to drop this ridiculous divorce idea and accept that this is your life now." "No." The word came out as barely a whisper, but it was the first time Sarah had defied him directly. David's grip tightened. "No. You think you have a choice here? I've been documenting your behavior for months. Sarah, your mood swings, your paranoia, your threats to hurt yourself. I never threatened to hurt myself. That's not what my security cameras show. Amazing what good editing can do these days." Sarah's heart stopped. "You're lying. Try me. Push this divorce, and I'll have you declared mentally incompetent. You'll lose the baby. You'll lose everything. And you'll spend the next few years in a psychiatric facility while I raise our child with Amber." He released her shoulders and stepped back. "Or you can be a good wife, accept the situation, and we can all live happily ever after. Your choice." That night, after David left for another night with his mistress, Sarah sat in their living room staring out at the dark ocean. The hope Jake had given her was already crumbling. David wasn't just cheating on her, he was planning to destroy her. Sarah had been living in a state of constant anxiety for 2 weeks when Jake called with what he claimed was urgent news. "I need to see you right away," he said. "Something's come up that changes everything." They met at a coffee shop in Santa Monica, far from David's usual haunts. Jake looked excited, his eyes bright with what Sarah hoped was good news. "I've been digging into David's finances," he said, sliding a manila folder across the table. "And I found something huge." Sarah opened the folder. Inside were bank statements, credit card records, and what looked like company expense reports. "He's been using company funds to pay for Amber's lifestyle," Jake explained. "The necklace, the hotel rooms, even her rent. It's corporate embezzlement. Sarah, this could destroy him." Sarah's heart pounded as she flipped through the documents. The evidence was overwhelming. Thousands of dollars in company money being funneled to Amber through fake consulting contracts and inflated expense reports. "This is it," Jake said. "This is how we bury him. We file for emergency custody citing his criminal activity, and we demand half of all marital assets before he can hide them offshore." "Are you sure this will work?" "Positive. I've already filed the paperwork. The hearing is tomorrow morning." Sarah felt dizzy with relief and terror. After weeks of feeling powerless, she was finally fighting back. The next morning, Sarah sat in the courthouse waiting room, her hands folded over her pregnant belly. Jake had assured her this would be routine, that the evidence was so overwhelming the judge would have no choice but to rule in her favor. But when they entered the courtroom, Sarah's confidence evaporated. David was there with 3 lawyers. all in expensive suits, all looking confident and relaxed. And there was someone else, a woman Sarah didn't recognize but who seemed to be taking notes on everything. "Your Honor," David's lead attorney began, "my client is here today because his mentally unstable wife has filed frivolous charges based on falsified documents." Sarah's blood went cold. Falsified documents, but Jake had said they were genuine. "Furthermore," the attorney continued, "we have evidence that Mrs. Mitchell has been struggling with severe depression and paranoid delusions throughout her pregnancy. She has threatened self-harm on multiple occasions." He handed a stack of papers to the judge. Sarah tried to catch Jake's eye, but he was staring straight ahead, his face pale. "These are security camera recordings from the Mitchell home," the attorney said. "They clearly show Mrs. Mitchell in various states of distress, making threats against herself and the unborn child." Sarah watched in horror as the judge reviewed the documents. She wanted to scream that they were lies, that David had manipulated everything, but Jake put a restraining hand on her arm. "Your Honor," Jake finally spoke, "my client has been the victim of an elaborate fraud." "Mr. Morrison," the judge interrupted, "I'm afraid your evidence has some serious problems." Sarah's world tilted. "Problems? What problems?" "The financial records you've submitted appear to have been tampered with. The metadata shows they were altered using sophisticated software." Jake's face went white. "Your Honor, I can assure you." "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I'm concerned about your professional relationship with the plaintiff. Court records show you've had multiple personal meetings outside normal business hours." Sarah felt the room spinning. What was happening? How had everything gone so wrong so quickly? "Based on the evidence presented," the judge said, "I'm granting temporary custody of the unborn child to Mr. Mitchell. Mrs. Mitchell will submit to psychological evaluation and will vacate the marital home immediately." Sarah's vision went dark around the edges. She couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. Jake grabbed her arm as she started to sway. "Sarah, we need to go. Now." Outside the courthouse, Sarah threw up in the parking lot while Jake held her hair back. "How?" she gasped between dry heaves. "How did they know about the documents?" Jake was quiet for a long time. "Finally," he said, "someone tipped them off. Someone who knew exactly what evidence we had." Who would do that? But even as she asked the question, Sarah was beginning to understand. The timing had been too perfect. David's lawyers had been too prepared. Jake helped her into his car, but instead of starting the engine, he turned to her with an expression she had never seen before. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you." Jake's confession hit Sarah like a physical blow. "David offered me $2 million to be your lawyer," he said, unable to meet her eyes. "My job was to gather all your evidence and strategies, then make sure you lost in court." Sarah stared at him, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing. "You've been working for him this whole time." "Not working for him. I was supposed to help you, but also keep him informed. I thought I could play both sides, get you a decent settlement while earning the money." Jake's voice was barely a whisper. "I never expected him to destroy you this completely." "Get out." Sarah's voice was deadly calm. "Sarah, let me explain. Get out of this car right now." Jake hesitated, then opened the door. "Your things are already at the Sunset Motel on Vine Street, room 212. David had them packed while we were in court." Sarah stared straight ahead as Jake climbed out. She waited until he was gone, then screamed until her throat was raw. 20 minutes later, she was standing in the doorway of the shabbiest motel room she had ever seen, peeling wallpaper, a bed that sagged in the middle, and the distinct smell of cigarettes and despair. Her entire life had been reduced to 3 suitcases and a broken heart. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed and called David. He answered on the first ring. "Enjoying your new accommodations." His voice was cheerful, like they were old friends catching up. "How long?" Sarah asked. "How long have you been planning this?" "Oh, months. Ever since you started getting suspicious. I knew you'd eventually try to fight back. So I prepared." David chuckled. "Jake was expensive, but worth every penny. Did you really think I'd let some washed-up marketing nobody take half my fortune? I'm carrying your child. Are you? Because Jake's been sending me photos of you with other men. Amazing what the right angles and timing can suggest." Sarah felt the walls closing in. "There are no other men. You know that. I know that. You know that. But will a jury know that? Especially when your own lawyer testifies that you've been emotionally unstable and sexually promiscuous." The line went dead. Sarah lay down on the scratchy bedspread and cried until she couldn't cry anymore. Then she called her obstetrician to reschedule her appointment, only to discover David had canceled her insurance. She called her bank to check her account balance, $12.37. She called a different lawyer, then another, then another. None would take her case without a substantial retainer, and word had already spread through the legal community that she was unstable and litigious. By evening, Sarah was sitting in a fast food restaurant, stretching a single cheeseburger to last as long as possible while she tried to figure out what to do next. That's when the contractions started. At first, she thought it was just the stress and the uncomfortable plastic chair, but when the pain hit again, stronger this time, she knew something was wrong. 7 months pregnant was too early. Way too early. Sarah grabbed her purse and stumbled outside, trying to hail a taxi. When one finally stopped, she gasped out the name of the nearest hospital. "Lady, you okay?" the driver asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. Sarah doubled over as another contraction hit. "Hospital, please." The emergency room was a blur of harsh lights and medical terminology. Sarah lay on a gurney while doctors hooked her up to machines and asked questions she could barely focus on. "Is there someone we can call?" a nurse asked. The baby's father, Sarah gave them David's number because she didn't know what else to do. He arrived an hour later, looking concerned and loving for the benefit of the medical staff. "Honey, I came as soon as I could," he said, taking her hand. "How are you feeling?" But when the doctor stepped away to check her chart, David leaned close to her ear. "This is perfect," he whispered. "Premature labor caused by mental instability. The court's going to love this." Sarah tried to pull her hand away, but David held tight, smiling for the nurses. "She's been under tremendous stress," David told the doctor when he returned. "She's been having paranoid episodes, threatening to hurt herself. I've been worried about the baby's safety." The doctor nodded sympathetically. "Pregnancy can exacerbate underlying mental health issues. We'll need to monitor both mother and child carefully." Sarah wanted to scream that David was lying, but who would believe her? She was alone, broke, and going into premature labor. David was the successful businessman who had rushed to his wife's side in her time of need. The contractions stopped after several hours of medication and bed rest, but the damage was done. The hospital incident was now part of her medical record, complete with David's statements about her mental health. When they discharged her the next morning, David offered to drive her back to the motel. "This doesn't have to be ugly," he said as they sat in his Tesla outside the Sunset Motel. "Accept the situation, take the small settlement I'm willing to offer, disappear quietly. What settlement? $50,000. Enough to start over somewhere else, somewhere far away from Los Angeles. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. 50,000, you're worth 50 million. 50 million that you had nothing to do with earning. My company went public because of my work, my vision, my sacrifice. You were just along for the ride. Sarah got out of the car and walked toward the motel. Behind her, she heard David's window roll down. The offer expires in 24 hours, he called. After that, you get nothing. That night, Sarah lay in the dark listening to the sounds of the city beyond her thin motel walls. Sirens, car horns, people living their lives while hers fell apart. She thought about David's offer. $50,000 would at least get her somewhere safe, somewhere she could start over with the baby. But it would also mean letting him win completely. Sarah placed her hands on her belly, feeling the gentle movements of her unborn child. "I'm not giving up," she whispered. "We're going to fight." She just had no idea how. Sarah had been living in the motel for a week when salvation seemed to arrive in the form of Melissa Chen, her former best friend from college. "I saw the news about your divorce," Melissa said, sitting across from Sarah in a diner near the motel. "I can't believe David is doing this to you." Sarah had been surviving on vending machine food and free coffee from the motel lobby. Seeing Melissa, with her designer clothes and perfectly styled hair, was a painful reminder of how far she had fallen. "I've been following the story online," Melissa continued. "The way the media is painting you as some kind of unstable gold digger is disgusting. You believe me, then, about what David's really like?" "Of course I believe you. I never liked him. Even when you first started dating. There was something cold about him." For the first time in days, Sarah felt a spark of hope. "I don't know what to do, Melissa. Every lawyer I've called won't take the case. I have no money, no evidence that isn't corrupted. And David seems to be 10 steps ahead of everything I try." Melissa leaned forward conspiratorially. "What if I told you I might have something that could help?" Sarah's heart jumped. "What do you mean?" "I work in digital forensics now. Corporate stuff, mainly. But I have access to some pretty sophisticated tools." Melissa glanced around the diner, then pulled out her phone. "I've been doing some digging into David's social media accounts, his company's digital footprint." She showed Sarah a series of screenshots. "Look at this. David and Amber have been sloppy. There are hotel check-ins, restaurant bills, even some texts that got backed up to cloud services." Sarah stared at the evidence, her hands shaking. "This is it. This proves everything." "Not just proves it," Melissa said, her eyes bright with excitement. "I can create a comprehensive timeline of the affair, cross-referenced with company expenditures. It's ironclad proof of both adultery and embezzlement." "Why are you helping me? We haven't talked in 3 years." Melissa's expression softened. "Because what David is doing to you is evil, and because I should have been there for you when you needed me before." They spent the next 2 days putting together what Melissa called a digital case file. It was more comprehensive than anything Jake had prepared, with timestamps, geolocation data, and financial correlations that painted a damning picture of David's behavior. "This is going to destroy him," Melissa said as she printed out the final documents. "No judge in the world could ignore this evidence." Sarah felt giddy with relief. "How soon can we file?" "I've already reached out to Rachel Morrison, the best family law attorney in the city. She's agreed to see us tomorrow morning based on the strength of what we've found." That night, Sarah slept better than she had in weeks. Finally, She had the ammunition she needed to fight back. But when she arrived at Rachel Morrison's office the next morning, the attorney's expression was grim. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm afraid there's a problem with the evidence your friend provided." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "What kind of problem?" "The metadata on these documents has been manipulated. Someone used deepfake technology to create these images and texts. They're completely fabricated." The room tilted around Sarah. "That's impossible. Melissa is a digital forensics expert. She would never." "Ms. Mitchell, I ran these documents through our authentication software. The manipulation is sophisticated but detectable. If you had tried to present these in court, you could have been charged with perjury." Sarah's vision went gray around the edges. "I don't understand." Rachel Morrison leaned forward, her expression sympathetic but firm. "Someone set you up. They wanted you to believe you had smoking gun evidence, so you'd present it in court and destroy your own credibility." Sarah stumbled out of the law office, her mind reeling. Melissa was waiting in the parking lot, and Sarah could see from her expression that she already knew. "You're working for him too," Sarah said. It wasn't a question. Melissa had the grace to look ashamed. "He contacted me 6 months ago. Before any of this started, he said he was worried about your mental health, that you were becoming paranoid and delusional. And you believed him. He was very convincing, and he offered me a lot of money." Melissa's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I really am." Sarah walked away without another word. Back at the motel, she sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process what had happened. David hadn't just planned her destruction. He had orchestrated it with surgical precision, using people she trusted as weapons against her. Jake, who had pretended to be her salvation while feeding information to the enemy. Melissa, who had pretended to be her friend while setting a trap that could have landed her in prison. How many others? How many people in her life had David corrupted or compromised? Sarah's phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen. "Enjoying your day in court?" he asked when she answered. "How did you know about the evidence being fake?" "Because I had it created, obviously. Melissa did exactly what I paid her to do. She gave you hope, then set you up to commit a felony." Sarah closed her eyes. "Why are you doing this to me?" "Because I can. Because it amuses me. Because I want you to understand exactly how powerless you are. I'm carrying your child, David. Are you?" Though because I'm starting to have doubts about that too. The line went dead. That evening, Sarah received a call from Child Protective Services. Someone had reported that she was living in unsafe conditions while pregnant, that she was mentally unstable and potentially dangerous to the unborn child. They wanted to meet with her tomorrow. Sarah hung up the phone and finally understood the full scope of David's plan. He wasn't just trying to divorce her and take their money. He was trying to take their child away from her before it was even born. And the worst part was, it was working. The Child Protective Services interview was a nightmare. Sarah sat in the sterile government office while a caseworker with kind eyes and a clipboard asked questions that felt like traps. "Mrs. Mitchell, can you tell me about your current living situation?" "I'm staying at a motel temporarily while the divorce proceedings." "How long have you been homeless?" "I'm not homeless. I have a room." "At a motel where the weekly rate is paid by county assistants." Sarah's cheeks burned. She hadn't known David had arranged for the county to pay for her room, making her look like a charity case. "Can you tell me about the domestic violence incident that required police intervention?" "What incident? There was no." The caseworker consulted her notes. "Police report filed last Tuesday. Neighbors reported screaming, sounds of a struggle." Sarah's mind raced. Last Tuesday, she had thrown up for hours from stress and food poisoning from the motel vending machine. She had been sick and alone, but there had been no domestic violence. Ma'am, are you currently using any substances? Of course not. I'm pregnant. What about prescription medications for your mental health issues? I don't have mental health issues. The questions went on for an hour. Each one was based on reports and documents that Sarah had never seen, painting a picture of a woman who was unstable, homeless, possibly addicted, and definitely unfit to care for a child. When it was over, the caseworker looked at her with what might have been sympathy. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm recommending that you enter a supervised care facility until the baby is born. It's not punishment. It's for the safety of both you and the child. What kind of facility? A residential treatment center that specializes in high-risk pregnancies involving mental health concerns. Sarah felt the walls closing in. And if I refuse, then we'll have to consider emergency custody measures to protect the unborn child. That night, Sarah sat in her motel room and Googled the facility they wanted to send her to. It was basically a psychiatric hospital for pregnant women. The reviews were horrific. Women who went in rarely got their children back. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Meet me at Griffith Observatory. Come alone. You have one chance left. Sarah stared at the message. It could be another trap. David seemed to have an endless supply of people willing to betray her for money. But what choice did she have tomorrow? She would be committed to a facility that would almost certainly result in losing her baby. Tonight was her last night of freedom. The observatory was nearly empty when Sarah arrived. She climbed the steps slowly, her pregnant belly making her awkward and breathless. A man emerged from the shadows near the telescope display. He was tall, thin, with prematurely gray hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Marcus Webb. I'm a journalist with the Los Angeles Tribune. Sarah's heart sank. If this is about an interview, it's not. It's about your husband's company. Marcus gestured for her to sit on a nearby bench. I've been investigating TechFlow Industries for securities fraud. Your husband's affair with Amber Hayes created a paper trail that led me to some very interesting financial irregularities. Sarah's pulse quickened. What kind of irregularities? The kind that could put him in federal prison for 20 years. Marcus pulled out a tablet and showed her a series of documents. David's been inflating user numbers to boost the stock price. The money he's been spending on Amber is actually investor funds being used for personal expenses. When the SEC figures this out, and they will, TechFlow is going to collapse overnight. Why are you telling me this? Because I need someone on the inside to confirm what I've found. Someone who has access to David's personal finances and behavior patterns. Sarah laughed bitterly. I don't have access to anything. David destroyed my life. Tomorrow I'm being committed to a psychiatric facility. Marcus studied her carefully. What if I told you there was a way to turn this around? A way to make David the one who loses everything? I'd say you're either lying or you don't understand how powerful he is. I understand exactly how powerful he is, but I also understand his weakness. Marcus leaned forward. David's entire empire is built on lies. Sarah, stock manipulation, investor fraud, tax evasion. The affair with Amber isn't just morally wrong. It's evidence of criminal behavior. Every dollar he spent on her is a federal crime. Even if that's true, how does it help me I have no proof, no credibility, no resources? You have something better. You have David's arrogance. Marcus showed her a small recording device, no bigger than a button. He thinks he's untouchable. He thinks you're beaten. That makes him careless. You want me to record him. I want you to let him gloat. Let him tell you exactly how he destroyed you. Let him brag about the crimes he committed. Narcissists can't resist explaining how clever they are. Sarah stared at the device. And then what? Then we destroy him the same way he destroyed you. Systematically. Completely. Legally. What if he finds out? What if this goes wrong? Marcus's expression was grim. Then you're no worse off than you are right now. But if it works, David Wilkins goes to prison and you get your life back. Sarah took the recording device. It was warm from Marcus's palm. There's something else, Marcus said. Amber has been posting evidence of their relationship on social media for months. Expensive gifts, luxury vacations, hotel rooms. She's inadvertently documented every crime David committed to fund their affair. She's that stupid. She's that narcissistic. Just like him, they're going to bring each other down. That night, Sarah lay in her motel bed holding the recording device. Tomorrow she was supposed to report to the psychiatric facility. But maybe, just maybe, she had one last card to play. She thought about everything David had taken from her: her home, her money, her friends, her dignity, her freedom. But he had made one mistake. He had left her with nothing to lose. And a person with nothing to lose was the most dangerous person in the world. Sarah never reported to the psychiatric facility. Instead, she called David and asked to meet him one last time. I want to accept your offer, she said when he answered. The $50,000. I'm ready to give up and disappear. David's voice was smug with victory. Smart choice. My lawyers will have the papers ready this afternoon. I just want to see you one more time. To say goodbye properly. They met at their old house in Malibu. Sarah stood in the driveway looking up at the mansion that had once been her prison, the recording device hidden in her jacket pocket. David opened the door wearing a silk shirt and expensive jeans. Behind him, Sarah could hear music playing and the sound of feminine laughter. Amber's here, David said without bothering to hide his satisfaction. I hope that doesn't make this awkward for you. Sarah followed him into the living room where Amber was lounging on the white leather couch, wearing one of Sarah's old robes. The sight should have been devastating, but instead, Sarah felt oddly calm. Sarah, Amber said brightly, as if they were old friends. David told me you're finally being reasonable about the divorce. Something like that, Sarah said, sinking into the chair across from them. David poured himself a drink from the bar. I have to admit, Sarah, I'm impressed. I thought you'd fight longer. Fight with what you took everything. Not everything. I left you with your dignity. David chuckled. Oh, wait. No, I didn't. I took that too. Sarah's hand moved to the recording device in her pocket. How did you do it? How did you plan all of this so perfectly? David's eyes lit up. He couldn't resist the opportunity to explain his genius. It started about 8 months ago when I realized you were getting suspicious. I knew I needed an exit strategy that would leave me with everything and you with nothing. He sat down next to Amber, who curled against him like a cat. The first step was isolating you, making sure you had no job, no independent income, no friends who weren't connected to me somehow. You drove away my friends on purpose. Of course, a few strategic comments about your instability, your neediness, your jealousy. People don't want drama in their lives. Sarah. They were happy to distance themselves. Amber laughed. You should have seen some of the things he told people about you. The paranoid accusations. The threats to hurt yourself. None of that was true, Sarah said quietly. Truth is irrelevant, David said, taking a sip of his drink. Perception is everything. And I created the perception that you were unstable long before you actually started acting unstable. What about Jake? How did you turn my own lawyer against me? David's smile widened. Money, obviously, but also blackmail. Jake has some interesting gambling debts and a cocaine habit his wife doesn't know about. I offered him a way out of both problems. And Melissa was easier. I've been paying her for information about you since college. She's the one who told me when you were getting suspicious about my late nights. Sarah felt sick, but she forced herself to keep asking questions. The evidence she gave me, the fake texts and photos, brilliant. Wasn't it? I had them created by the same deepfake specialists who work on Hollywood movies. Cost me $50,000, but it was worth it to see the look on your face when you realized you'd almost committed perjury. Amber was scrolling through her phone. Oh my God, David, look at this. Someone posted a video of her at the courthouse. She looks so pathetic. She turned the phone toward Sarah, showing a grainy video of Sarah stumbling out of the family court building, obviously distraught. 2 million views and counting, Amber said gleefully. The comments are brutal. Everyone thinks you're psycho. David leaned forward, his eyes bright with malicious pleasure. The best part is, you did most of the work yourself. Every time you tried to fight back, you made yourself look more unstable. Every lawyer you called, every desperate phone call, every public breakdown was just more evidence that I was right about you. What about the baby? Sarah asked softly. Is the child really yours? David shrugged. DNA test will prove it one way or another, but honestly, it doesn't matter. By the time you give birth, I'll have full custody and you'll be in a psychiatric facility. The kid will grow up thinking Amber is its mother. Amber giggled. I'm already picking out nursery decorations. Something modern and sophisticated, not the tacky baby animals you had planned. Sarah stood up slowly. I should go. Sarah. David's voice stopped her at the door. I want you to understand something. This isn't personal. It's just business. You were an asset that became a liability. I handled you the same way I'd handle any failing investment. By destroying it completely. By cutting my losses and moving on to something more profitable. Sarah walked to her car without looking back. Once she was safely down the road, she pulled over and checked the recording device. 43 minutes of David confessing to fraud, blackmail, manipulation, and conspiracy. She called Marcus Webb. I got it, she said when he answered. Everything. He confessed to crimes I didn't even know he'd committed. Perfect. How soon can you meet me? Now. And Marcus. I want to do more than just expose him. I want to destroy him the same way he destroyed me. Sarah, are you sure you want to go that far? Sarah thought about Amber wearing her robe in her house, about the video of her breakdown going viral, about David planning to steal her child and lock her away. I'm sure. The next 72 hours changed everything. Marcus Webb's article hit the Los Angeles Tribune's website at exactly 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. The headline read, Tech CEO's Affair Exposes Massive Investor Fraud, but the article was just the beginning. Sarah had spent the previous day with Marcus and his team, helping them understand the full scope of David's crimes. The recording device had captured more than just David's confession about destroying her marriage. It had captured him bragging about stock manipulation, investor fraud, and using company funds for personal expenses. Even more damaging was what they found when they started digging deeper into Amber's social media accounts. Your husband's mistress is a walking crime scene, Marcus told Sarah as they scrolled through months of Instagram posts. Look at this. Amber had documented everything. Designer bags worth tens of thousands of dollars, each one tagged with the date she received it. Luxury vacations to Dubai and Monaco, with her posting photos from private jets and five-star hotels, jewelry, cars, an apartment in Beverly Hills with rent that exceeded most people's annual salaries. She's basically created a timeline of David's embezzlement, Marcus explained. Every gift, every trip, every expense can be traced back to company funds. But Sarah's favorite discovery was Amber's OnlyFans account. She's been live streaming herself talking about her sugar daddy CEO for months, Marcus said, pulling up video after video. She's told her subscribers details about David's business, his personal life, even confidential company information. In one particularly damaging video, Amber bragged about how David was manipulating TechFlow's user numbers to inflate the stock price. In another, she giggled about how stupid his investors were for believing his projections. She's not just documenting the affair, Sarah realized. She's documenting securities fraud in real time. The article went viral within hours. By noon, TechFlow's stock had dropped 30%. By evening, the SEC had announced a formal investigation, but Sarah wasn't done. She called the IRS tip line and provided them with detailed information about David's offshore accounts and unreported income. She contacted the California Attorney General's office about the falsified evidence and perjury. She reached out to every investor David had defrauded with a comprehensive breakdown of his crimes. Most importantly, she called Child Protective Services. I have evidence that David Mitchell has been systematically falsifying reports about my mental health, she told the caseworker who had interviewed her. I have recordings of him confessing to creating fake evidence and bribing witnesses. Within 24 hours of the article's publication, David's world began to collapse. The SEC froze TechFlow's assets pending investigation. The FBI raided David's offices and his home. His investors filed a class action lawsuit seeking hundreds of millions in damages. Jake Morrison was arrested for ethics violations and fraud. His law license was suspended pending criminal charges. Melissa Chen lost her job when her employer discovered she had been using company resources to create falsified evidence. And Amber Hayes became the most hated woman on social media. Her OnlyFans subscribers, realizing they had been unwitting witnesses to federal crimes, turned on her viciously. The comments on her posts were brutal. Her follower count plummeted as brands and sponsors ran from any association with her. But the final blow came from an unexpected source. Sarah was in her new apartment, a modest but clean one-bedroom that Marcus had helped her find, when she saw the news alert on her phone. Amber Hayes releases tell-all video, I was just a naive girl in love. Sarah clicked on the link and watched in fascination as Amber, looking significantly less polished than usual, threw David completely under the bus. I didn't know what he was doing was illegal, Amber sobbed to the camera. He told me the money was his, that he had every right to spend it on me. I was just a naive girl who fell in love with a powerful man. The video was clearly an attempt to save herself from criminal charges, but it was also a complete betrayal of David. Amber provided details about his crimes that even Sarah hadn't known, including offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and a plan to flee the country if the investigation got too close. Sarah's phone rang. It was Marcus. Are you watching this? He asked. I can't look away. She's destroying him. The FBI is taking this very seriously. Word is they're going to arrest David tonight. Sarah felt a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness. What happens now? Now David faces federal charges for securities fraud, money laundering, and about a dozen other crimes. He's looking at 20 to 30 years in prison. And Amber? She'll probably get a deal in exchange for her testimony, but her career as an influencer is over. No one trusts her anymore. After Sarah hung up, she sat in her quiet apartment and tried to process what had happened. 3 weeks ago, she had been living in a motel, facing commitment to a psychiatric facility, about to lose her unborn child to David's manipulation. Now David was about to be arrested as a federal criminal, and she was free. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "This is David. I know what you did. This isn't over." Sarah stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. It was over. David just didn't know it yet. The footage of David Mitchell's arrest played on every news channel in Los Angeles. Sarah watched from her hospital bed as FBI agents led her soon-to-be ex-husband out of the Malibu mansion in handcuffs, his usual arrogance replaced by genuine fear. Sarah had gone into labor that morning, 3 days after the arrest. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was bringing their child into the world on the same day David's world ended completely. "Mrs. Mitchell." The nurse entered the room with a smile. "There's a reporter here who says you're expecting him." Marcus Webb appeared in the doorway, holding a small bouquet of flowers. "How are you feeling?" "Like I can finally breathe," Sarah said, looking down at the tiny baby in her arms. "Meet Emma, Emma Sarah Mitchell." Marcus approached carefully. "She's beautiful. How does it feel to know she'll grow up with her father in prison?" Sarah had been thinking about that question for days. Honestly, relief. David would have been a terrible father. He would have treated her the same way he treated me, like a possession to be controlled and manipulated. What about Amber? Any thoughts on her plea deal? Sarah had learned that morning that Amber had agreed to testify against David in exchange for reduced charges. She would serve 2 years in minimum security prison and pay restitution to TechFlow's investors. "I actually feel sorry for her," Sarah said, surprising herself. "She's young and stupid, and she fell for David's lies the same way I did. The difference is, when she realized who he really was, she was smart enough to save herself." Marcus pulled up a chair. "There's something else. The state of California wants to charge David with additional crimes related to what he did to you: falsifying evidence, witness tampering, conspiracy to commit fraud. More prison time. Potentially, but they need your testimony." Sarah looked down at Emma, who was sleeping peacefully despite the chaos of the world around her. "Will it help other women who might be in the same situation I was in?" "Absolutely. David's case is going to set precedents for financial abuse and manipulation in divorce proceedings." "Then I'll testify." Over the next few months, Sarah watched David's empire crumble completely. TechFlow declared bankruptcy. The mansion was sold to pay creditors. David's cars, his art collection, even his expensive watches were auctioned off. The money Sarah had thought was lost forever began returning to her through asset recovery. Not all of it, but enough to secure a future for herself and Emma. More importantly, the truth about David's character was now public knowledge. The recordings Sarah had made were played in courtroom after courtroom, destroying any remaining sympathy people might have had for him. Jake Morrison was sentenced to 3 years in prison for fraud and legal malpractice. Melissa Chen avoided prison time, but was ordered to pay substantial restitution and would never work in digital forensics again. And David himself was sentenced to 28 years in federal prison for securities fraud, money laundering, and a dozen other charges. Sarah attended the sentencing hearing, holding 6-month-old Emma on her lap. When the judge read the sentence, David turned to look at her. For just a moment, she saw not the arrogant manipulator who had destroyed her life, but a broken man who finally understood that his actions had consequences. Sarah felt no satisfaction in his defeat, only closure. After the hearing, Marcus walked her to her car. "So, what's next for you?" he asked. Sarah strapped Emma into her car seat, then straightened up to answer, "I'm starting a nonprofit to help women who are being financially abused by their partners. I want to make sure no one else goes through what I went through." That sounds like exactly what the world needs. As Sarah drove away from the courthouse, she thought about the woman she had been a year ago, naive, dependent, willing to sacrifice her own identity for the illusion of security. That woman was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who understood that true security came not from depending on others, but from knowing she could survive anything. Emma made a small sound from the back seat, and Sarah smiled. "Don't worry, baby girl," she said softly. "I'm going to teach you to be strong from day one. No one will ever have the power to destroy you the way your father tried to destroy me." The sun was setting as Sarah pulled into the driveway of her small but comfortable house. It wasn't a mansion, but it was hers. She had earned it, paid for it, with her own money, put it in her own name. For the first time in her adult life, Sarah Mitchell was truly free. 2 years later, Sarah stood at the podium of the Beverly Hills Hotel ballroom, looking out at an audience of 300 successful women, the annual conference for her nonprofit. The Sarah Mitchell Foundation for Financial Independence had grown from a small support group to a nationally recognized organization. "When my ex-husband told me I was nothing without him," Sarah said into the microphone, "I believed him. I had given up my career, my financial independence, my identity. I thought love meant sacrifice. But what I learned was that real love never asks you to sacrifice yourself." The audience was silent, hanging on every word. David Mitchell is serving a 28-year prison sentence for fraud and financial crimes. But the real crime was what he did to my sense of self-worth. He convinced me that I was weak, that I was helpless, that I needed him to survive. Sarah paused, looking down at the notes she no longer needed. "I'm here to tell you that no matter how powerless someone has made you feel, no matter how thoroughly they've convinced you that you can't survive without them, they're lying. You are stronger than you know. You are more capable than they want you to believe. And you deserve better than someone who uses your love as a weapon against you." The applause was thunderous. After her speech, Sarah mingled with the audience, listening to stories that were heartbreakingly familiar. Women who had been isolated from friends and family. Women who had been convinced they were crazy or incompetent. Women who were just beginning to realize that they deserved better. "Ms. Mitchell." A young woman approached hesitantly. "I just wanted to thank you. Your story gave me the courage to leave my husband. He was doing the same things to me that David did to you." "Are you safe now?" Sarah asked. "I am, and I'm in law school. I want to help women like us." Sarah smiled. "The world needs more lawyers who understand what we've been through." As the evening wound down, Sarah stepped out onto the hotel's terrace, breathing in the cool Los Angeles air. The city sparkled below her, full of possibilities. "Excuse me, are you Sarah Mitchell?" Sarah turned to see a man in his 40s, tall with graying temples and kind eyes. He looked familiar, but she couldn't place him. "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" "Robert Chen," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Melissa's older brother." Sarah's body tensed. She hadn't spoken to Melissa since the trial, though she knew her former friend was working as a waitress after losing her career in tech. "I wanted to apologize," Robert continued, "for what my sister did to you. It was unconscionable. You don't need to apologize for her choices." "Maybe not, but I feel responsible. I knew Melissa was struggling financially, and I knew she had a history of making bad decisions when money was involved. I should have been there for her. Sarah studied his face. Are you here because she sent you? No, she doesn't know I'm here. I came because I've been following your work with the foundation, and I wanted you to know that not everyone in my family agrees with what she did. Robert reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. This is a check for $50,000. I know it doesn't undo the harm she caused, but I'd like to donate it to your foundation, in memory of the friendship you two used to have. Sarah stared at the envelope. I can't accept this. Please, let me do something positive with money that ultimately came from the same tech industry that enabled David's crimes. Sarah took the envelope, touched by the gesture. Thank you. This will help a lot of women. They talked for a few more minutes about the foundation's work, about second chances and redemption. When Robert left, Sarah felt lighter somehow. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. Emma's asleep. Everything okay at home? Sarah smiled. Emma was 3 now, a bright, curious toddler who knew nothing about her father except that he lived somewhere else and wouldn't be visiting. Sarah had decided to tell her the truth when she was older, but for now, Emma's world was filled with love and security. As Sarah drove home to her daughter, she thought about the woman she had been when this all started. Pregnant, terrified, convinced she had no options and no future. That woman couldn't have imagined the life Sarah was living now, running a successful nonprofit, speaking to audiences around the country, raising a confident daughter who would never doubt her own worth. The house was quiet when Sarah arrived home. She paid the babysitter and tiptoed into Emma's room, watching her daughter sleep peacefully in her crib. "Mommy's home," she whispered, brushing a curl away from Emma's forehead. In her own bedroom, Sarah changed into pajamas and sat at her desk to review the foundation's financial statements. They were helping more women every month, providing legal assistance, financial planning, job training, and emotional support. Each success story felt like a small victory against the David Mitchells of the world. As she prepared for bed, Sarah's phone chimed with a news alert. She almost ignored it, but the headline caught her attention. Former tech CEO David Mitchell found dead in prison cell. Sarah stared at the screen, feeling oddly numb. According to the brief article, David had been found unresponsive in his cell that morning. The cause of death was listed as apparent suicide. Sarah sat down heavily on her bed. She waited for some emotion to surface. Relief, sadness, anger, something. But all she felt was empty. David Mitchell had taken his own life rather than face the remaining 26 years of his sentence. Even in death, he had found a way to avoid full accountability for his actions. But Sarah realized something as she sat in the quiet darkness of her bedroom. David's death didn't change anything that mattered. Emma would still grow up safe and loved. The foundation would continue helping women escape situations like the one Sarah had survived. The world would keep turning. David had spent his life trying to convince people that he was indispensable, that the world revolved around him. His death proved what Sarah had known for years: the world was better off without him. Sarah turned off the light and lay down, listening to the sound of Emma's gentle breathing through the baby monitor. Tomorrow she would return to the work she loved, helping women discover their own strength. Next month, she would keynote a conference in New York about financial abuse in relationships. Next year, she planned to expand the foundation to include job training programs. She had built a life that mattered, a life that helped others, a life that was entirely her own. David Mitchell had tried to destroy her, but in the end, he had only made her stronger. As Sarah drifted off to sleep, her last thought was a promise to Emma: "You'll never have to fight for your right to exist. Baby girl, Mommy already won that battle for both of us." Outside, the city hummed with life and possibility. Inside, two survivors slept peacefully, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring. The story that had begun with betrayal and humiliation had ended with redemption and purpose. Sarah Mitchell had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemy. Sometimes it's building a life so meaningful that their opinion of you becomes irrelevant. She was no longer the woman who had begged at a runway, desperately trying to save a marriage that was already dead. She was the woman who had risen from the ashes of that marriage to build something beautiful. And that was a victory no one could ever take away.